Hi, I wanted to do a quick video presentation of a paper that we have assigned for the class, which is called Can Smallholder Extension Transform African Agriculture? And the paper deals with a randomized controlled trial of an intervention in Kenya to try and improve agricultural yields and, of course, profits. So let's take a look at what the paper does. Here's the abstract and the authors, Joshua Deutschman, Kim Siegel, Amelia Schoenstrom, and Maya Dur. And the abstract is pretty clear. Agricultural productivity lags behind other regions of the rest of the world. A lot of investment I don't know if this is necessarily true, that there's more evidence on what fails than what works, but that's the author's claim, especially for smallholder producers. And they study a program that targets multiple constraints to productivity, so a bundled package, and in a randomized control trial setting in Kenya. They find that participation in this program by the One Acre Fund, a non-governmental organization, leads to economically significant gains in profits, which is really what we care about at the end of the day. Maximizing yields or output is not really very relevant if it's very expensive to do so, and could even be produce negative profits, which of course would be hardly something we would desire. And interestingly, the program yields uniformly across the samples, so that poorer farmers do just as well as wealthier farmers, and in this context, in this sample. So that's the abstract, and let's just take a quick look and see what they actually did. We'll do just the basics, preliminaries, the results, and then just a concluding thought or two. So this is a big question that they're addressing. In development theory, you could promote agriculture, industry, or services in order to determine which one of them to allocate more resources to relative to the other. One has to make determinations about the likely social return to different investments, and also, of course, the linkages, the multiplier effects of each kind of investment. So it's a big job to try and do that, and this is contributing one part towards that very big job that economists are engaged in, of trying to determine the relative magnitudes, short-term and long-term, of various investments that a country like Kenya or Uganda or another country might want to make. So they're going to be looking at a intervention, the One Acre Fund program, and their claim is that the program increases profits of participating farmers by 16%. So if, let's say that profits from farm operations are 30% of farmers' incomes, and then they earn the other 70% from other activities, from trading, from working as laborers in cities during the off season. So farmers, like other people, have many sources of income. Their farm is not just the only source, and this is just one part of their farms too. It's just the maize part, the corn part, that they're focusing on here. But still, increasing 30% of your income by 15% is nothing to sneer at. It's a 5% or so increase in your overall income. And if you were increasing your income by 5% a year, that would be quite a healthy rate of growth of your income. Every 15 years or so, your family's income would be doubling if that were the case. So it's a good, healthy return if indeed it's replicable, externally valid, and internally valid, the finding. And as I mentioned, the program bundles, we'll talk in a second about what the program actually does. The program bundles part that targets farmers' financial constraints, that is, the access to credit. It targets their risk aversion and inability to insure themselves against risk by offering insurance. And it also targets their lack of knowledge about certain kinds of productive practices by offering farmer education. So that's, they do have an interesting point at the end, which is in terms of the validity of this. You can do this experiment one time and people say, but what about in the real world? What's going to happen after your experiment's over? And they find that the experiments, that the farmers who were in the experiment were not more likely to renew. Actually, I misworded that. They were about the same renewal as other farmers, but they were likely to increase the acreage that they had under the program, suggesting that the farmers valued the program themselves. The program itself grouped farmers into groups of 8 to 12 farmers, and they got loans that were the typical group liability loans. One farmer, if one farmer doesn't pay, the other members of the group are responsible for paying that person's that person's loan. They got improved seeds and fertilizer, and these are assured by the One Acre Fund to be high quality. They got trained in agricultural techniques. They got crop and funeral insurance. They got some market facilitation services in order to enable them to have better markets for their crops. So in order to assure that they got really good prices for their crops rather than selling to any kind of market wholesaler who happened to come by and tempted them with immediate cash, but at a low price for their crop. And the data collection is interesting because the data collection was managed by the organization doing it. So you might think, oh, they have a kind of an interest in making the program look really good. So they took a number of steps to reduce concerns about that kind of bias. And many of the variables here, the yield and the acreage, were measured independently by weighing the crop values by using GPS coordinates. So they're less prone to response bias in order to make the organization look good. The randomization was public, and they had a lottery where people were grouped, and that's a common thing in randomized control trials at the community level, is to have the randomization be public so that people aren't thinking that, oh, somebody was in the program because they had some special favor or some special deal. And there was very little attrition in the program. So that's another aspect that is interesting for this particular program. Let's look very quickly at the table, the balance table. So we have a bunch of variables here. And then we have the mean for the control group and the mean for the treatment group. And then the difference between the mean and treatment group, along with asterisks that are indicating whether the difference is statistically significant. And we see that most of the differences are not statistically significant, but there are a couple that are statistically significantly different. And in particular, the maize yield is a little bit higher, about almost 8%, maybe higher, for the treatment group compared with the control group. In the paper, they'll suggest that maize yield is very variable, and so it shouldn't read too much into this difference between treatment group and control group, because even within treatment group or control group, maize yield from year to year varies considerably, and last year's maize yield often is not a good predictor of this year's maize yield. So they tend to discount these differences as possibly introducing bias into the estimate of the effects of the program. So a variety of other baseline measures of characteristics of the two groups, the treatment group and the control group. Let's clear these drawings and let's go on to the results. So the first result has to do with farm practices, and we're looking for the coefficient here on the participation in the program. So this is the treatment, and we see that we have the coefficient here. Did they do more row spacing? Yes, they did more correct row spacing. And this is the standard error. So remember, our t statistic is the coefficient beta divided by the standard error, and our rule of thumb is if that's greater than 1.96, then it's statistically significant. So here we have 0.24 divided by 0.04, so that's a t statistic of about 6. So of course that would be statistically significant. We have 3 asterisks here. Right, so they decide to follow the AER convention of not including asterisks on the coefficients. So these are a variety of indicators of good crop practices: row spacing, plant spacing, and fertilizer timing. Whether or not they used a plow is not an indicator of improved practices, because, as they suggest, it's the timing that matters more than the amounts of things used. And indeed, using the plow, there's no statistically significant difference between the treatment group and the control group. Let's take a look at another set of practices, which is input usage. So how much fertilizer did they purchase to use on the farms? How much did they spend on improved seeds? How much on labor? And how much extra unpaid labor, household labor, did they use? So we see that the treatment group used more fertilizer, they used more seeds, they used more labor, and they paid labor, and they used more unpaid labor. So they seem to farm more intensely than other farmers in the control group, which was the whole point of the program, was that they would farm more intensely or intensively. Let's look at the next panel of results. I think, isn't that what we already did? Input costs, fertilizer, seeds, paid labor, fertilizer, seeds, paid labor. Oh, that was the gross, and this is on a per acre basis. Sorry about that. I've forgotten why these two were different. So on a per acre basis, we see basically the same thing, that at least for fertilizer, more per acre, not so for seeds. On a per acre basis, less paid labor, and no difference for unpaid labor. Then we turn to the actual important results. This is the effects of the treatment in terms of profit. So we're really not going to be that interested in yields or output, because at the end of the day, if you're paying for a bunch of inputs, if the value of the extra yields you get doesn't cover the cost of the inputs, there's no reason to do that. That's dumb to do that, right? You're paying more for inputs than you're getting an extra value of output. So we really only care about profits when we're thinking about what should a farmer do. We don't want to encourage a farmer to lose profits, to make lower profits than they did. That would be making them poorer than they were at the beginning. So here we see we have two samples, what they call the primary sample and then the full sample. And the primary sample takes care to distinguish some of the farm households that already participated in the program. And to the extent that they'd already participated in the program, maybe they wouldn't be seeing any changes in their behaviors. So that's why they want to be careful about maybe these farmers that have already participated in the program and they've been randomized into the treatment group. Maybe we should run the regression without including them in the regression. So that's the primary sample. And the full sample includes everybody. And we see that the effect in the primary sample is higher than the effect in the full sample, suggesting indeed that people who've already been in the treatment aren't doing as well as new people are doing in the treatment relative to the control group. But in all cases, the coefficient on profits is positive and is statistically significant. So 58 divided by 30 is roughly 2. 60 divided by 27 is roughly 2. So remember, it's the beta, the coefficient, divided by the standard error, gives us the t-statistic, which tells us whether it's statistically significant. So they're basically all statistically significant. What's the magnitude of these coefficients? Well, to see the magnitude, we look at the baseline value. So for here, the control group baseline value is about 335. Maybe it's in Kenyan shillings or US dollars. I'm not sure what the unit of measure here is for profits. Let's say it's US dollars. So the treatment group has 58 more dollars on average as profits. So profits are going up by almost 15%, right? A little between 15 and 20%. Here, this estimate is more like 20%, right? So 10% of 335 is 33, 20% is 66. So it's a little under 20%. For the other sample, the full sample, the effect here we have the control group is 364 average, and that goes up about 12, 13%. Here goes up a little less than 10%, maybe 8%. So 33 is about 8% of 364. I'm just doing that math in my head. It might be a little off, right? So a fairly substantial 8% increase in profits is nothing to sneeze at. A 20% increase or 18% increase in profit is certainly pretty large. So the program seems to be doing its job of substantially increasing the profits that farmers have on their fields, which is a hopeful sign. One might ask whether these results are due to particular specifications. Maybe they tried a whole bunch of specifications and then just reported the ones that suggested high profits. So what they do in this chart, this nice graphic, is here on the y-axis, they're measuring the effect of the treatment. So that 30, 20 that we saw in the table earlier. So the height here is the effect of the treatment. And then we have the confidence interval, upper and lower, right? So this whole thing is the confidence interval. And then down here, we have the 9 possible specification things that they could do, which controls to include the pre-specified ones or ones that are chosen through machine learning algorithm, a variety of other options that are explained in the paper. And then the squares here indicate whether this one was done for this specification. So this specification had the full sample, had pre-specified controls, had missing yield equals fresh weight, had missing land equals self-reported 1, and nothing else. So those are the 3 things that this regression does. And you can see there's 9 possible choices that could be made about specification here. There are, of course, many others, polynomials, log specifications, right? So we could have hundreds and hundreds of specifications. They're reporting a wide range of specifications here. So it looks like, I didn't count, but it looks like there's about 50 different specifications here. And then you see that on the whole, the effect is always positive and generally statistically significant. It's not statistically significant if the confidence interval includes 0, as it does for some of these specifications. So it's a nice little visual way of presenting a whole bunch of specifications, the coefficient of interest estimate, along with its confidence interval. And so on the whole, positive effects. And that leads to their concluding thought, perhaps this evidence will nudge a few cynics into reconsidering the future for smallholder agriculture in sub-Saharan Africa. And This suggests that there's one kind of program. There are many other kinds of programs too. We've read several in this course that seem to be having decent sized positive effects.